Bill, throughout your business career, you've been able to do something that a lot of folks haven't been able to do, and that is that you've been able to build and sell a very successful business for more than $100 million, dollars, while at the same time, you were able to have a pretty good quality of life. And that's not something that a lot of entrepreneurs and CEOs are able to balance. So, what I really want to talk about here today is really explore that tension between how do you start and build and run a fast growing business while at the same time not kill yourself and give up everything else in pursuit of building this business. So, maybe I think a good place to start here would be this idea of I think you knew at an early age that having a good quality of life was important to you. So tell me a little bit about the backstory of Bill and where that came from, and maybe what are some of the things that you did earlier in your life or earlier in your business career to really get on that path of having a good quality of life.
Well, thanks, Steve. That's a good question. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and being a nonconformist was natural to me. I wasn't big on rules that were set by others or made by others. For me, I really valued freedom and independence. I knew I wanted that in my life when I got older. The dream of travel represented that for me. I remember as a kid, couldn't wait for the National Geographic magazine to arrive at my house, and I would just devour it and read it voraciously, and was so intrigued by other cultures, other places, and that was a real standout to me as a kid. That interest in travel and being independent and free to do that. I was lucky as a teenager. I played a lot of tennis, and that became my early outlet. I was fortunate to play on the national circuit and traveled independently all over the United States from the age of 15 on. So from a small town in Massachusetts, I saw the rest of the country and met a lot of really nice and interesting and successful people, who many of whom took me under their wing. So perhaps that's why I've always wanted to help others and enjoy coaching so much. When I finished college, I really wanted to travel. Again, an expression of the independence that I wanted. And I deferred law school at the very last minute and backpacked for a long time in Europe and North Africa. And then after law school, again, I took time and I backpacked again for a long time, mostly in Asia. So, and then I ultimately lived in Europe, in Italy, and in Asia, in Bali, Indonesia. So I guess I've always been different. Um, but as some friends have said, I navigated the quote unquote real world pretty well.
Yeah, I'm sure sounds like it. So then you're traveling the world, you're backpacking, you go to law school, you were a competitive tennis player. So obviously you've got a competitive streak, a competitive drive in you. So how did you go from that to actually starting a business? Was that like a kind of a predetermined thing, or did it just happen? What's the story behind the business that you founded?
It just happened. Yes, I certainly had the drive, and I was searching for something to do, and I wanted to do something beneficial. I was a lawyer for some years, and I just found it very adversarial, even though I was doing transactional work. And I wanted to be on the other end of the phone line, doing something as a business. So I was away for a while after a long trip. True story. Came home, wanted to visit my dad. Went to lunch with him. He was a small town dentist. That day, uh, an orthodontist who worked in his practice was there, just on Wednesdays when he normally came. We went to lunch, and during the lunch, the orthodontist friend just complained about how he never got paid, or real payment was difficult, and how it really affected his practice. And I just developed this idea with him about how do we take the money out of your hands and help you as a dentist or an orthodontist. And it really was the beginning of the idea to finance the fee for the patients. So I did some research on it, and my office was in my garage. Started interviewing other orthodontists who would be nice enough to see me. And I thought, well, maybe there's an opportunity here to finance the fees and take it off the hands of, or off the plates of the dentist or the orthodontist. So, and I wondered, why hasn't anyone else thought of this? It just seemed like such a obvious idea, but nobody had. And so I hired a few people. I paid them out of my personal checkbook for the payroll. And it was really the classic business school case example where we almost went out of business a dozen times. I was down to my last mortgage payment. I collect Native American artifacts. I had my favorite old Navajo blankets. I put it up for auction so I could hopefully get 2 to 3 months of mortgage payments for it. Fortunately, that month we made our first profit and I was able to pull it from the auction. But it was really that close to the edge for a long time. Early on, I was fortunate. I was at a family funeral and I met up with with a cousin who was a little bit older than me. And I told him what I was doing and his eyes lit up. And he ultimately joined up as my partner. That's a whole nother story, but I wanted control. I wanted 60-40. He wanted 50-50. We went back and forth. I reluctantly agreed to 50-50, but it was the best decision I ever could have made because with our partnership, I know a lot of partnerships don't always work, but ours was built on trust and mutual respect, and it was 1 + 1 = 4. It was a great relationship. We never had a crossword. There was parity in everything we did and everything we decided upon. And we really pioneered a new industry, and we knew we were in uncharted space, and we took a lot of arrows, but fortunately stayed on the horse. I'd say as an entrepreneur, like many entrepreneurs, you make some bold moves along the way. I remember one of them was changing our pricing when we were just getting started. We were so sensitive to what our clients would want. We actually did it on a napkin at a restaurant in La Jolla, California. And we were so fearful that that change would be disruptive and hurt our business. But like many other things, it turned out to be an easy change that was only positive, created a lot of value for our company. We were able to afford to do more things than we had before. And as I'm thinking and talking and thinking, there was a second bold move that a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs have to make, I think, at different times, is do you expand or stay where you are? I mean, we were happy with our business at that point. We weren't making a lot of money, but we were able to take vacations with our families and go out to restaurants. We weren't, I wasn't down to my last mortgage payment anymore. And while we were still financing patients in the orthodontic space, the issue is at that time was, do we expand into other categories such as high-end dental? That was our next potential. But we were afraid we would cannibalize our business, and we were afraid that the change would be too dramatic and we might just crater. So it was a lot of study and soul searching. We ultimately decided to make that change, and it just set so many things in motion. It was such a positive thing. So I think, like many entrepreneurs, you might fear change, you might fear a result of making a dramatic move, which at the time that seemed to us to be very dramatic. But it really turned into a positive. There were no negatives. It was our own fear holding us back. After that, we started going into new categories like eye laser surgery, infertility, cosmetic surgery, types of medical and dental procedures that were uninsured or partially insured. And then that created the whole category. Our expansion into those areas that no one had been in before. And today it's now a big industry, but it was really fun pioneering it, trying to figure it out. It was a very special time in life.
Well, a couple of things I want to touch on from what you just said there. One was going back to your partner. Was he active in the business, or was he more of a financial partner in the background, or did you two like equally share running the company or have a division of labor? How did that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, we were both active in the company. So I was the CEO. I think his title was COO, although uh, titles really didn't matter between us. It was more, I was the outside person in the company, handling all of the strategic partnerships and alliances and relationships. And he was handling a lot of the operations in the company, the bank operations in particular, and our bank relationships. So we were both very active. At one point, he had some health issues and he had to step out. His doctor told him he really couldn't work anymore. So for the last couple of years, he was not active. Um, but we still stayed partners, 50-50 partners between the two of us. And he still participated whenever um, I needed his help or he thought there was something productive he could do. And he was, even though he wasn't able to work full time, he was still, very active and very present.
Were there any points where you two had a significant disagreement? And I guess what I'm getting at is, are there any secrets to getting along with your partner? Because as you mentioned, a lot of partnerships don't work. You guys were
Right,
family, so you had that kind of bond. But were there
right.
other ways that you two developed to work through any potential disagreements that you may have?
We never had a disagreement. I can honestly say that. He and I respected each other. We were usually quiet while the other spoke, so that we let the other person finish, didn't interrupt. If I came up with an idea, it may not have been complete. He would take it another level, then maybe I would do the same, or vice versa, and we would step it up all the way through to come to a good solution. So I can honestly say we always found a way to get to a better solution. And that's why I said at the beginning, it was really a 1+1 = 4. There was never anything negative or at issue and between the two of us. So I think that's maybe more rare than normal. Um, but in my case, I was just really fortunate that that was our situation. Being family may have helped. I knew him from a young age and someone I trusted completely, and he grew to trust me as well. So I think having that trust as a baseline and that foundation was really key. And then also respect. He came from the banking world. I came from a different world on the legal side and business as well before I started the company. We had our own space, but so we had, like, you've seen the circle diagram where this is where one person is one circle, one person's the other, and how much of the circles overlap. We had that, but we had our own spaces off to the side, and each of us had a lot of respect for each other's knowledge and experience in those spaces.
You also mentioned that you had some points during the life of the company where you had to make some big decisions. And I think one of the first big
Right.
decisions you mentioned was deciding were you going to expand beyond the orthodontic financing space.
Mhm.
What I want to ask you related to that is, how do you think your vision evolved over time? And I think you said, when I got into this business, I really didn't have an idea that this was going to be $100 million plus type business. Was there a point, were there inflection points where you started to realize, wow, this actually could be something pretty big? And tell me a little bit about
Mhm.
how the vision evolved as the founder.
Well, another good question, and it's fun to reminisce about this again. I think one inflection point was the story I mentioned earlier about deciding to go into a new space. That just catapulted the company where we were hiring people very quickly. We got on the map so that big banks like Chase and Citibank and GE Capital at the time were calling us saying, "Oh, you guys have done a really nice job in this space. We've been researching it. We're going to come in and eat your shorts unless you want to sell to us now." So there was a lot of, that kind of attention, and we thought, "Oh, well, if the big boys are paying attention, it must be interesting to them." So we, I think, we started to realize once we expanded into the additional categories that we could possibly grow this to be a pretty big business. I can honestly say though that neither of us did it thinking, oh, we're just going to make a lot of money doing this. I think that happened organically and actually was a bit of a surprise to us. Banks would buy our loans, and then two of the banks who were looking at that to buy the loans ultimately offered to buy the company. I wasn't really ready to sell the company at that point because we were growing so fast. But I'm glad we did, and it was a long negotiation, and it was really important for me to take care of our people. So even after the transaction happened, I stayed on for another 18 months just to be sure all the people were taken care of. We had hundreds of employees, and I knew them all by name, and it was like family. I cared very much for them and wanted to be sure they were all set. So the growth happened fairly quickly, but organically. We didn't have a model to follow. No one had been doing what we had done before. So it was just, running as fast as we could and swimming as hard as we could against the current to try to just, keep our head above water, keeping smiling face in place all the time, like we knew what we were doing. So I think a lot of those factors are what I can remember, and how we were perceived in the market was probably always bigger than we really were. So there was a lot of marketing that was involved with that, and PR. But one of the, and I think too, the foundation of that was, it was a happy place to work. Our employees were happy, and we had a happy business. Usually people who were able to afford and pay for their health care may not have otherwise, or some preferred to pay for it this way than using a credit card or their home equity loan or something. And it was usually, a lot of times it was for their kids, and it was just a happy business. And in fact, our core values we developed were simple. And I think as a coach, talking to a lot of companies, core values are really important, but they tend to be really long, dragged out, many lines long, and no employees really know what. If you ask an employee to recite it, they probably couldn't. We had one. It was called thrill our customers. So when they walked in the door, there was a poster, thrill our customers, and the subline to that was smile through the phone. A lot of our interactions were by phone. And as corny as that might sound, it really made a difference. As we grew, everyone who came in as a new employee, and they were coming in fast and furious for a while, they knew that was our culture. Okay, that we were a happy company. People who worked with us were happy. Our employees had to be happy, and those core values really resonated. And of course, as I said before, our employees could recite it. It was so simple.
So we've talked here a little bit earlier about you're a competitive guy. I think undergrad, Yale, Boston College Law School, nationally ranked tennis player, playing all over the country. You start this business, it's growing like crazy. But then how do you maintain this quality of life? So what I want to ask is, running the business, maybe what are some of the things that you did that enabled you to not really work like 80-hour, 100-hour weeks that a lot of entrepreneurs might be doing in the early days of the business, where there's some business strategies, ideas, tactics, the way you develop the business, the people or whatnot, that enabled you to not be totally chained to the business?
Well, yes, another really good question. I think a few things come to mind. Delegating, communication, and I'd have to say culture. Delegating, because I can't say I was naturally good at that or natural at that. Of course, in the beginning, I had to do everything and it had to be a certain way. But as the company grew, I realized I couldn't do that. And it was important for me to be home for dinner and be with my kids. My children were really young when I started the business. So out of necessity, I forced myself to learn how to delegate. And it was hard at first. But then it became the norm. And I found that when people became empowered, they took on more responsibility and were willing to be accountable. So it freed me up. It freed me up to keep my life sane, allowed me to focus on the real opportunities for the company, which for me at that time were developing relationships with partners and allies that would in our industry and outside the industry, and professional relationships. I couldn't have done that if I was mired in all the weeds. So I think getting out of the weeds gave me the ability to float pretty high up in the stratosphere in the company and be free. So I could rely on my people, or the people who were at all different levels in the company, to do their job and do it well. So I'd say delegating was key. I think also equally important is communication. We were a top down and bottom up designed communication company, and that was just organic as well. But bottom up would be that we listened to our employees. They felt like they were invested. So, for example, my door was always open. On Mondays from 9 to 12, I had 6 direct reports. Each of them would come to my office for 30 minutes, tell me everything they were doing, just what I could, how I could help them. So I knew what they were doing. They had my help. And then they would do the same thing with their direct reports. So every Monday morning, we'd start fresh. What are we doing for the week? How did last week go? Every Tuesday, we had lunch with Bill. So bring in lunch. Anyone who wanted to come into the conference room would come in, have lunch, and I would learn from anyone in the company at any level, what was on their mind. Every Friday, we had lunch for the whole company, which was more informal mingling, but everybody would be there and have lunch together. All of those activities generated a lot of bottom-up kind of information. And then once a month, we would have an all-hands company meeting, and I would present what happened last month, what we're planning to do going forward, and all the senior execs would get up and make a presentation, whether it was sales or marketing, HR, operations. So the employees felt like from the top down, they were getting information. So we had a really nice flow of communication. I think that was very key. It kept people informed. They felt like they were part of the team. They felt comfortable, safe. They heard the good news. Fortunately, a lot of it was good news. If there were challenges, they knew what the challenges were and what their roles might be in overcoming those challenges. So again, I think delegating was important for me. Communication allowed me to be free because I felt like people were doing their jobs and I didn't have to babysit them. Culture, I think, is being the third leg of the stool there, because people felt valued, they felt important, they felt listened to. And again, the core value was it was a happy place, and smiles, and that became our mantra. So I felt I started even before I sold the company taking summers off, and I would just check in one day or one call a week with my senior team, and that was a real overextension of delegating, I suppose, because my kids were off in school, they were young, we'd go away for the summer, and I just was able to trust my senior employees and all my employees to allow me to do that. And during that time, the business still continued to grow. So it worked out for me, and it didn't really have a negative effect on the company.
I want to touch on the delegation piece here for just a second before we move on to what I'll call part 2, which is life after the exit. So with the delegation, what do you think was the most difficult piece of work for you to let go of and let somebody else do?
Well, I think relationships. I value relationships. I think that was a strength of mine, was maintaining relationships. As a company grew, more relationships came into our fold, and there were just so many I couldn't manage them. And it was for me, it was releasing my ability or interest in developing that relationship or maintaining that relationship and handing that off to somebody else. Fortunately, I had one especially uh, great business development person who was really my trusted right arm, and I felt very comfortable delegating to him because he just did a great job. He was a someone we found as we got bigger. We used executive search firms, national search firms that, I know a lot of CEOs and entrepreneurs have issues with hiring the right people for the right seats. And we found him in a national search and had to relocate. So it was expensive and it took more than we could probably afford at the time, but it turned out to be a good move. And so he would be somebody I felt comfortable delegating to, but again, only because he was very capable. I think if he wasn't in that spot, and I didn't have confidence that I could delegate to a particular person, it might have been a different outcome. But in my situation, handing over those kind of relationships to someone of his caliber was made it easy.
So the company's doing great. You get approached by some buyers. You decide you're going to sell the company. You're still a young guy. I think you sold it, maybe you were in your early 40s when you ended up
Mhm.
selling. So I want to talk about that, but I think you touched on that you shared some of the proceeds with your employees. So touch on that a little bit. How did you think
Okay.
about sharing the proceeds with your team members instead of you and your partner keeping it all for yourself?
Well, that was actually pretty easy. Uh, we were in a tech startup that just had equity if you started working with our company. We didn't have that kind of a setup, but we were like a family. And uh, one of the probably the two best days of my life, or among the two best days of my life, were after we sold the company. My partner and I decided we wanted to give back. It was something we had talked about prior to. It was a 9-month negotiation, so we had a lot of time to think about it. But once the transaction was final, we were able to settle on the economics, and we wanted to give back between 10 and 15% of what we received as a company to the employees. And they deserved it. They worked hard. We had such high retention. Uh, Nobody really left, but they made salaries or commissions, and this was an opportunity to really help them as people in their lives, and we felt like they deserved it. So those 2 days were that we personally handed out checks to the employees were really fantastic days. A few quick stories. There was one woman, she was older, had been our receptionist from early on and did everything, and everyone loved her. Well, she came into the office, and nobody knew when they came in the office why they were coming in. Everybody kept it quiet. And we gave her over 3 years of pay. And she ended up, we had to support her as she almost fell to the floor. So that was a fantastic moment. And then there were 3 women who were great friends. We invited them in together, and they got almost the same. And again, we had to hold 2 of them from falling to the floor. So it really made an impact on their lives and made us feel great. And we were so fortunate to be at a place where we could even do that. But even employees who started with us in the last 6 months or 1 year, we had a sliding scale for how much they would get, and it was very meaningful to all of them. So many were able to pay off their home mortgages or make a big dent in it, or help pay for their kids' education. And it was one of the best feelings ever to really give back to people who were meaningful to us and had done so much, and they were so loyal to the company. And we just felt like it was our obligation, but more importantly, it was just our desire. We just wanted to give back to them.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. And so here you are, you're giving away a lot of money to your team members. You and your partner are taking home quite a bit of money. And I'm imagining that you've got enough money now that you don't ever have to work again if you choose not to, but you're in your early 40s. So,
Mm.
how did you think about the rest of your life? How are you going to find meaning and purpose after the exit when you probably, staying in good health, you've got decades of runway here? How did you think about that?
Right. Well, it's interesting because I think I've certainly had a lot of conversations with others in a similar situation. I was in Boston, and a lot of my friends had exited their companies and were young, some older, some younger. Uh, most had plans to stay home and have an independent life, but I found that most of them went back to work, uh, even before I sold my company. So I had some examples to look at. Some of them went home for 6 months and their wives told them they had to leave the house because they were, uh, it was a difficult transition for her. They went back to work. Some just wanted to make more money and they went back to work. So I didn't I didn't want to be a slave to anyone or anything. I found for me, I didn't have that strong desire that I had to go back to work. I ended up getting involved in various businesses as an advisor or consultant, sometimes an active investor. That kept my head in the game a little bit. But the priority for me was my kids. My children were young. I was so fortunate. They were both under 10 years old. Um, that was my priority, to be home with them. And so everything revolved around that. I'm half Italian. Their mother is half Italian. So we would have dinner for 1 to 2 hours every night and talk. I coached their teams. I took them to their activities. Their their life became my highest priority, and we traveled a lot and took a lot of cool trips. So, but to answer your question, I stayed just as busy. So I was fulfilled. I felt like I had done my soul work with the company and had done some good things. And I wanted to learn about some of my interests in life, which were people and cultures. So I had always collected wine since I was in my early 20s. I'm a collector by nature. I started collecting Native American artifacts, Asian tribal artifacts, reading voraciously all the reference books and becoming fairly knowledgeable in those areas. That interest took a lot of my time and energy when I wasn't with the children, but made me satisfied and made me fulfilled. So I found that gaining that knowledge and staying uh, active in many ways, athletics and with my children, really sustained me through that time. So again, I found a lot of value in being a very present father, and I participated in my children's childhood, which I wouldn't change for anything.
You're a coach here at CEO Coaching International. How has your experience of being a founder of a fast growing business, having a significant exit, and having a couple decades post exit of the kind of life that you were just describing here, how are those experiences translating into the conversations and the coaching that you're having with clients?
Again, that's a really topical, important question. I think what I'm finding is that many CEOs want a better lifestyle, a more balanced lifestyle. And they confide that their relationship isn't great with their spouse or partner at home, or they want to spend more time with their kids. And how can they do that? And can they do that? Uh, so I think that's something I can help with. The issues tend to be around delegation. Are they a micromanager? Do they trust their people? Can they find the right people for their team? And then the culture in their company, is it the right culture? Is it a culture where the employees are happy? Are they loyal? Do they feel empowered? And in that area, I think two-way performance reviews are really great because you get that bottom up feedback. So something we also talk about. And do the employees think that senior management or the CEOs have their backs? So that's all culture. And I think that if your culture is a strong, positive, fulfilling culture, that makes a CEO's life a lot simpler and better. Takes a lot of anxiety out of the workplace. But also communication is key, as I talked about earlier. I think both directions, top down, bottom up, having that kind of communication where you're learning from your employees what they need, what they're seeing in the marketplace, depending on what kind of business you're in, uh, listening to that, absorbing it, integrating it, and then also sharing with them from the top down how the company's doing, what are your challenges, how you're going to overcome them. I think that from a CEO's perspective, those three things are delegation, culture, and communication are all really, really important.
Well, Bill, as we get ready to wrap up here, I just want to close with a couple things. One is there anything else here that you want to share that we haven't talked about, or maybe another point that you want to reiterate that we did touch on a little bit?
Well, I can't think of one right now. It's just been fun sharing these memories with you, but nothing jumps out at the moment.
All right. All right. Well, then the final area that I want to touch on is I think you mentioned wine earlier and your passion
Mm.
for traveling and your passion for collecting. So I'd love to learn a little bit more of the personal side of Bill as it relates to wine, maybe a favorite winery that you've been to, maybe some of the types of
Mm.
wines that you like. Maybe tell me a little bit about your wine collection. How do you go about collecting wine? So tell me a little bit about Bill and wine.
Well, do you have a few days?
Yeah.
Um, well, okay, let me see. Where it all started for me, in college, of course, you drink beer and don't know much. But after college, as I mentioned, I was backpacking in Europe and I was running out of money with my friend. And we were staying in a little village in Provence, in southern France. And one day at the bakery, someone came in and asked about whether anyone was interested in picking grapes. It was October during the harvest. So we needed the money pretty badly. I think we were spending about $20 a day then, and we get paid like the equivalent of $5 an hour. So we did the math pretty quick, and it was one day of work, it equaled 2 days of travel. So we said yes. Ended up picking grapes at this vineyard, and every day was so much fun because we would start in the morning, pick grapes, quit around 11:30, have lunch on this long table out at the edge of the vineyard under trees, and they would bring us bowls of soup and bread and ham and cheese, and we'd all eat, and then we'd sleep under the trees for about an hour or two and then work in the afternoon. And we stayed there for quite a while and got to know the owner and actually worked in the cellars. So I got to pick and work in the cellars at a young age, 22 years old. um, I've always been a little crazy. When I came back to America shortly after, uh, I had $1,100 in the bank. I remember $1,132 to be exact. And I went
How
into a
many
wine
cents?
store. Yeah, right. I went into a wine store to buy, a $10 bottle of California Cabernet, and the guy talked to me. The salesman talked me into buying a case of '82 Mouton Rothschild, which has become a legendary wine. But it was $880 for the whole case, and I bought it. So I ended up with whatever 200 some odd dollars left in my bank account, and I saved that case for 25 years before we had the first bottle. So I started collecting, and I love that because I'm always learning something new. About 20 years ago, we started spending our summers in Tuscany in Italy, and I knew some producers there, and I speak Italian pretty well. So I met a few of them and helped them getting into the American market because it was new to them at the time. They were new to the international stage, and then I met so many through them. They would invite me for lunch, uh, and then introduce me to their friends, and then invite my kids the next time. And so they're just so welcoming. And I got to know the wine community in Tuscany and ultimately Piemonte in the north. And So I have many friends in the wine world, and I've spent a lot of time in cellars. And uh, so in terms of lifestyle, the Italian way is food, family, and friends, and wine is food. So you pair it with your food just like you would pair what's on your plate. And so I really like that lifestyle. It's good friends, good food, good stories, and it's all about the experience.
Well, Bill, I think we're going to have to wrap it there because I'm going to have to go grab a glass of wine now. You got me all excited about drinking some wine
Me
after
too.
after hearing those stories. So
Sounds
this has
good.
been great. So I really appreciate it. So for those of you listening, to get all the notes from this show, you can go to ceocoachinginternational.com. We've got this show as well as all the previous ones. We've got some great blog posts there, some great leadership articles as well. So, Bill, again, thank you. Great show here. And look forward to all the great work that you're doing with all of your clients.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me on.